Hello, good day, wherever and whenever this finds you. My name is Rumbie Mutanga, and I'm a solicitor here at AJ Park, and I'm very lucky and very excited to be joined by Wynn Crawshaw of Wynn Hamlyn. Wynn is a designer here in New Zealand, and his brand has been around for about 10 years, 9, 10, depending on the different publications that you read. And so I'm very excited to be talking to Wynn about his business and his fashion design journey. So, Wynn, hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. No, thank you so much for making time to join us and kick in with us. So, um, I guess kicking into it, very first question, which is really big. So, feel free to break it down how you see fit. Could you give us a little bit of an overview of your design journey?
Yeah, sure. So, um, I guess for a design journey, I got interested in fashion when I was probably in high school, and I I used it as I guess a social mechanism to find confidence and find myself you know feeling good, and then used it at university to express myself, and then found myself at university doing extracurricular sort of papers to make up points to get my degree, which wasn't to do with fashion, which was a land surveying degree, and found myself just falling in love with everything about the creativity and the sort of also not just the creativity, but I guess that's interaction with us socially in our everyday lives, and kind of caught the bug, I guess you say, um, and never was able to get rid of it. Um, and I think probably from the background that I had at that time, which was as a land surveyor, and sort of moving from my upbringing as a rural farm boy, um, my design sensibility had a kind of technicality and a practicality to it, and still does. And yeah, I think it probably will obviously help shape what we kind of um, designate as our design fundamental principles today, which is craft as one, and the second one is innovation. So yeah, those two things kind of now are what we call Wynn Hamlyn.
Yeah, and actually just sort of picking up on the fact that you went from studying land surveying, and I believe you did that for a little period before you officially launched the brand. Um, do you think a lot of, or maybe not do you think, but to what extent does that learning and that education inform the pieces that you make and the fabrics that you use and just the Wynn Hamlin brand?
Yeah, definitely. Informs our design hugely, and I think I can't really put my finger on certain technicalities or accuracy sort of parts that are from surveying, but I think on the most part, it's the fact that like I wasn't a very formally trained fashion designer, and that essentially as a designer I'm a real outsider, and so there's a kind of real subversive offness to the design, which is just from not knowing what we're doing, and 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 I think that's probably gives some sort of sense of naivety to the cause, um, and some kind of, I guess, something different than what you might expect from people that are trained in the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think as we were sort of conversing, I mentioned that I was probably going to geek out over the macrame blazer because I think it's one of the best sort of Wynn Hamlin offerings that I saw, and I'm obsessed with that. And I think that sort of speaks to what you were saying about, you said it naivety, but I think the playfulness that comes from, I guess, not maybe being formally trained. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I think, and I think probably there's a conversion of a few parts of the things we've discussed in that piece as an example, and that's probably elements that are not generally expected or found in clothing, um, and that's probably due to just our general outsiderness in the making clothes space. Um, and yeah, and then there's just a real kind of attention to craft um, and wanting to explore those and introduce those, which is something that we've been doing since the beginning.
Yeah. And I saw, or I know that you work with quite a lot of collaborators in terms of, your craftsmanship. How do you decide who you're going to work with for each project or design or collection?
It would be, I guess, from two different probably areas. One would be if there's a certain craft or a certain technique that we really want to introduce into the clothes, and that is only possible through a certain craftsman or maker or artisan that we can find. And so we would seek them out and ask them to be a part of what we're doing. Um, and then secondly, it would be as if there's an artist or somebody that, I admire or, um, you know, really was looking at the time and um, found a way to introduce their work into the collection, um, which can also be, or could be challenging, but yeah, really awesome as well.
Yeah, I think at the moment you have the little, I call them bag charms, that little flowers that look really cool, and I'm kind of obsessed with those. But in terms of to be a little bit of like an IP lawyer about it, how do you go about, I guess, making sure that the elements that are Wynn Hamlyn and your brand are protected, but also navigating so you can have a creative relationship with the people that you're collaborating with?
Yeah, yeah, that's, yeah, I'll start with that first part of the question in terms of protecting any IP that we are working with. I generally find that most of the things that we are doing in a sort of like craft sense or in the ideas space in that regard are generally not something that um, gets copied uh, readily. And that's just because they're super tricky and hard um, and non-profitable to do, which is another problem for us. Um, but they're kind of like the type of things that like you steer away from if you're trying to make a quick buck kind of thing. And so they're not something that I guess people in fast fashion or anywhere like that are trying to sort of replicate uh, really quickly. Um, and and then my general ethos about those things is that generally they're crafts that aren't my ideas. They're other things that other people are pros at, and we use them in clothes. But if they're not exclusive to us, and we don't own them. So um, my sort of vibe on IP generally is that if it's something that people take and do different things with or whatever, it's open to the universe, Um, uh, aside from things that are extremely, like if they're using our name or something like that. Um, and and then the second part of your question is how do we ensure kind of a equitable relationship between us and the people we're collaborating with? Yeah, I think that's a really good question and something that's been um, a work in progress always. But generally, we just have a really clear understanding of exactly what um, the basis of the relationship is before we begin, and and we just talk about exactly what the costs are and who's going to pay those costs and what the remuneration is and what that looks like. And I think generally communication and being really open about what those are, nobody's kind of left feeling not good about it.
Great, thank you. I actually, I guess, have two questions to follow up on your two answers. My first one was then, so it sounds like communication is very key to sort of who you are as a designer, but also just who Wynn Hamlyn is as a brand. And I guess, how do you go about, I mean, obviously some of these people are people you admire, but how do you begin those conversations with people you do want to work with?
Well, good. I mean, it's generally just a cold call if it's somebody that I don't know or somebody that hasn't just come up organically throughout my life. And so often that cold call will be a technical call. You know, I'm ringing up some kind of like woodworker or a laser cutter or somebody that I want to speak to from a technical point of view. Um, and I think probably because I really, well, for one, I respect their craft. So there's kind of like a mutual respect built instantly from my admiration of them. And then, and also just in the sense that, you know, I, really, really research what they're doing and what I want to do with them. And so there's kind of like a ability to speak on their terms almost. Well, I'd hope so anyway. But yeah, there's just a kind of starts out from a talking shop perspective,
Yeah.
and moves on from there, I think.
Right. And then my second my second question was going to be, you said you're very open to the idea of like once you've created something, I guess it's out, it's, you know, it's in the open. To what extent do you use what's out in the open to inform what you do? Because a lot of your pieces, at least a lot of what I've seen, is very sort of almost traditional in a way, but then very fun. It's got fun little cutouts, or you're using fun fabrics and colors. How do you balance that, I guess, as a designer?
You mean like how do we balance um, the use of all these elements with an aesthetic that's kind of palatable?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it's a good question. That's something that is also a constant work in progress, and it's about sort of experience. I think it's, you know, having a critical eye and enough time to be critical of your collection as a whole, and sort of assessing it against commercial constraints and looking at kind of where it sits and just the ability for people to wear it essentially. And definitely the ideas start out as things that are not wearable and and we kind of have to, that's where we put our work in, and that's kind of going, cool, well, this is a fun idea, but you don't wear stained glass, you know, so like how do we do that, and how do we make that into a piece that's really easy, and a lot of times it doesn't work out, and so we just kind of that's why we have these huge sample sales of clothes that are just wacky and aren't really commercially viable.
Nice. Okay. I think we've kind of sort of touched on a little bit of what I was going to ask next, but I guess what my next question would be, what inspires you when you're selecting elements that you incorporate into your designs, or even sort of more holistically into the brand itself?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned briefly that, you know, you saw some traditionalism in the clothes, and I agree with that. And I think probably what inspires me or you can see in the work is the sense of nostalgia. That's something that I really enjoy, and I really like to work with things like your really classic knit stitches and cables and um, that kind of thing. And I enjoy seeing it sort of twisted and subverted in some way, to sort of give people that sense of nostalgia, but also modernize it or twist it to some extent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably something that inspires me. Uh, and and yeah, generally outside of that, I think I probably am just an absolute fashion nut. So I look at collections and I'm inspired by just general clothing and the possibility of how somebody could look in different silhouettes and different outfits.
Touching on being a bit of a fashion nut, I'm speaking to you in the middle of fashion month at the moment. Have you been following any of the fashion weeks? Do you have a designer or a collection that you're obsessed with?
Yeah, I generally I think I mean we for me fashion month starts out slowly because um New York I like, but it's not really where my favorites are, and then it goes to London, which is still quiet again, and I feel like France and Italy at the end of the month are where the real heat comes in. Um, so yeah, I mean, at the moment, like I don't think you can beat um, Peter Mueller at Alaya or um, Kim Jones at Fendi are just the two that I just can't go past. So um, two idols, you know.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Alaya collection this year was insane, and having it in the Guggenheim and seeing how that's inspired the designs, breathtaking.
Totally.
Very, very cool. Um, and so you are heading off to Europe soon with the collection. Are you able to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, a lot of people get it, um, you know, confused about Fashion Week and where if you're going to Fashion Week, what that means, and whether that means that you'll be doing a show or whatever. Um, for us doing Fashion Week in Europe is for sales, and for the most part for most brands it is actually, and aside from all the shows and all of the imagery that you see of everybody kind of on the streets, it's a very very kind of wholesale orientated week, where buyers from all around the world converge and uh, people sell their collections from showrooms. And and so our collection has been going to Paris for the last sort of 5 or so years, and we try to go with the collection as often as we can. Um, and and for a lot of years, that's been my wife. And um, and recently not as much because she's been um, having babies and looking after our kids. Um, so yeah, I think this September I'll go with the collection just to be there, and it's about sort of putting a face to the brand, but also you know seeing some buyers and maintaining some relationships that have been going on for a few years now.
Yeah. And speaking of sort of buyers and sellers and that kind of thing, obviously it's always a two-way conversation. You know, they choose you as much as you choose them. What do you look for when you're choosing, your Neiman Marcus's, your Selfridges, your Revolves, your Essences? What do you look for in those brands and those names?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think that as a small brand and a small business, um, there's less sort of like choosing from our side as say when you're extremely established and you don't sort of need the order. We're not in a position right now to turn down many orders. But there is a few instances where say an order placed by some store would completely alienate you from all these other stores. And in that situation, you just kind of have to weigh up the pros and the cons and kind of going, well, I could have 6 of this, but it would exclude me from 30 of this. And yeah, it's hard. It's always hard for a small business to turn down an order, but I think probably considering brand and that's our most valuable asset. That's something that we have to do sometimes.
Yeah. And I guess that sort of speaks to the integrity of your brand, but also just the importance of sort of knowing who you are and being like, this is who we are as a brand and the market we want to be available to, which I can only imagine is really tricky to do when you are a small brand or you're going overseas in a market that you're not predominantly settled in.
Yeah. And I think, from experience as well, a store that might want to sell the collection that potentially isn't on brand, and they are looking to buy the pieces that aren't so much telling the story of the brand or the collection, then you kind of think would be great to have the order again, but how long will that relationship last? Because if you can see the writing on the wall that they might not sell the collection well, it won't work for any party to continue when the sell-through doesn't happen, and you just delay pain really. If you accept the order, it's always going to end in tears.
Nobody wants that. I guess kind of circling back a little bit to where we were at the beginning to where you are now, and sort of as well at the beginning of this conversation to where we are now, sort of how has your creative vision evolved over time, and how has that been reflected in the brand as well?
I guess I think probably, subconsciously the collection grows and matures and gets older as I do, to some extent. And I think, thinking over the years, there's been certain times where we've been incredibly influenced by different commercial pressures on the collection, and having to have certain pieces that are maybe not 100% true reflection of the brand principles in every single piece. And so the collection's been, heavy on those pieces rather than the pieces that are our true vision. And I guess now probably we're in a time of coming back to exactly what we really feel passionate about, and making sure that every piece has those elements in it, and that's probably on the realization and reflection that those commercial pieces and putting that in the collection as fantastic and might be a success commercially, but long term in terms of building the brand and the identity around the brand isn't a really long term strategy, and that long term what people are really buying into, rather than the individual piece that they are buying that day, is the kind of ethos of the brand. And therefore we really need to just stay true to exactly what was fundamental in the beginning and is still fundamental now. So I think to answer your question is, ideally the evolution hasn't been too far from where we started, even though we might have gone in a circle to some extent.
Yeah, so a little exploration of the past, but you're staying very close to the lane that you created for yourself and who the Wynn Hamlyn person is. To be a little bit of a fashion journalist kind of person in this question, if you were to describe the Wynn Hamlyn person, because I know you design for both men and women, in 3 words, how would you distill that into 3 words?
Yeah, good question. It's a really interesting question as well because, um, speaking about our journey and our sort of fundamental reasons for being here, a lot of brands kind of are very focused on exactly who the sort of like who the girl is and exactly like um, you know who they are in terms of social and um, all of that kind of thing. And I think probably for us, always we have struggled with that because um, the principles that sort of make up the brand and the collection are based around these kind of elements and these sort of parts of art or whatever it is that we introduce into the collection that aren't exclusive to any certain type of person. They could be, all shapes and sizes and ages. And so it sort of has meant that our person is extremely sort of diverse from all those perspectives. And so the I guess the 3 words that I would use to describe them would be um, uh, confident, uh, interested, and I guess offbeat.
I love that. It's like the idea of like you become a Wynn Hamlyn person when it suits you. There's no one type of way to be a Wynn Hamlyn person. It's quite cool.
Yeah, I definitely think it's I mean I love the fact that, it's not just a brand that's for, size 8 girls in New York, it's
Yeah.
got more depth to it than that, and that's great.
Sorry, I think I just lost you.
Oh, sorry, so I can repeat that last part. I said,
Oh,
um,
sorry.
I said, yeah, it's fantastic that it just has such a diverse application or interested group, and it's not just for sort of a size 8 girl in New York or something like that.
Great. And I think I guess my last question for you is which is such a daunting question, so I'm very sorry to ask this, but where do you sort of see Wynn Hamlyn, the brand, in about 5 years? But do you also see yourself still in Wynn Hamlyn, the brand, or are you exploring other creative endeavors? Are you back to land surveying?
um, oh yeah, good question. I definitely will be here for the long haul at the brand. And I see the brand in 5 years just kind of expanding to, reach into different markets, and that would be in a wholesale sense and in a direct to consumer sense. Uh, and um, and that's, I mean, I guess not for the purpose of expanding for expansion's sake, but just because we've barely scratched the surface of people that would enjoy the brand, and and yeah, I think I mean for the time being, I'm really enjoying just kind of the exploration of what we're doing, and it's just nice to see the brand kind of like evolve and get better. So yeah, we'll be here.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Wynn. We really, really appreciate it. And we'll hopefully have you back in some capacity.